more arrests of young men trying to support or join the Islamic State from the U.S. to the U.K., while in Lebanon, the first batch of French-made weapons arrives with Saudi backing. Search and rescue efforts continue in the Mediterranean Sea after what's feared to be the worst migrant shipwreck in modern history. And in Luxembourg, EU foreign ministers hold a crisis meeting under pressure to find a solution. And Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in Pakistan with a $46 billion plan to link the two economies, setting the stage for a major boost in China's presence in Asia and the Middle East. Good evening. Today, a now familiar story repeats itself. Young Westerners making the choice to abandon their lives, whether in the U.S. or Europe or even Australia, to join the jihadist cause in Iraq and Syria. The FBI has made a string of arrests, 6 people in Minneapolis and San Diego, on charges of providing support to the Islamic State group. And on the other side of the pond, a 14-year-old British boy arrested in connection with an IS-linked plot on an event in Australia later this week. For its part, the Australian government today announced it will share intelligence with Iran to track foreign fighters working with the jihadist group. We'll go from this phenomenon all the way to Lebanon, where the first major shipment of Saudi-funded weapons arrived today. But first, a look back.
نعم، هناك تعاطف مع حماس ومع الجهاد ومع القوى الإسلامية، وأيضا هناك تعاطف مع النصرة، أو بعض الناس قد تجد تعاطف مع الدولة الإسلامية. نحن بشر عندنا أحاسيس.
قريبا جدا إن شاء الله ستبدأ فرنسا بالتحضير لتسليمنا ما نحتاج إليه، ما يحتاج إليه الجيش اللبناني.
Le Liban est en effet soumis à une pression de Daesh et du Jabhat al-Nusra qui n'a pas de précédent et fait du contrôle de ses frontières un enjeu vital pour sa sécurité.
نحن ندين العدوان السعودي الأمريكي الظالم على اليمن وشعبه وجيشه ومنشآته وحاضره ومستقبله.
They now control Lebanon with Hezbollah, they now control Yemen, they now control Damascus, and they now control Baghdad.
And with me tonight in the studio is Dr. Anat Ochberg-Marom, expert on global terror and marketing, and senior Middle East analyst Ali Waqid. Good evening to both of you. Thank you very much for being with me.
Good evening.
So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to sort of do the range of topics today, from foreign fighters to Lebanon, but I want to begin with the foreign fighters and these latest arrests. Late yesterday, 6 Americans arrested in Minneapolis and San Diego, a 14-year-old boy in the UK. Earlier this week, an Ohio man also arrested. We know that in the Middle East, when we have extreme economic problems, when we have a sort of chaotic situation of militias and governments fighting each other, that there's sort of obvious reasons for people to leave and maybe join the jihadist cause. What are the reasons for Europeans, for Americans, let's say, to leave their lives and join the jihadist cause in Iraq and Syria?
There is not only one reason why. There is a mixture of, there's ingredients that we can find that say that these are the you know, like something that motivate the teenagers to come over to jihad in Syria and Iraq. And I come now from the States, and I just try to understand by myself what is going on there, why the teenagers go and recruit themselves, not hiring, but are recruited to the IS, to Daesh, even to Al-Qaeda.
And what are the top risk factors, for example, that you look for?
The more extreme, the more successful, the more attractive Daesh is, and Al-Qaeda as well. Let's put it on together, because although they are competitors between themselves, they still cooperate in some common zones that we can say, but they are very, very attractive, like global brand. You know, like we may say, it's like the...
Right, they're the masters of branding more than maybe American brands.
Right.
Nurit, when we say that in companies such Google, they know to identify the movements you make in the on the net, in the Islamic State, there are recruiters that work on the internet and trying to motivate, for example, black from the United States in zones and neighborhoods where there are riots with the policemen, trying to target them very directly and launch campaigns towards these groups. And these groups can count maybe hundreds or even only dozens. But the Islamic State do not save any effort in trying to motivate them, in trying to incite them to join. When they say that what the riots are because you are black and Islam is the first religion to call upon equality, and the first muazzin, the first person to call for the prayer in Islam was a black militant of the Prophet Muhammad. This shows that the Islamic State can and know how to identify divisions within inside the societies and even within inside the sub-societies in every Western society. This is one thing. The second thing, the Islamic State for the moment is having some benefit from the fact that in spite of all the big slogans, we don't see yet that the strategy of the West in Iraq or in Syria is succeeding to stop the expansion of the Islamic State, and then they find the resources and they find the money and the time and the efforts to continue recruiting. They have a service for female. They have a service for a person who are not married. They have a service for teenagers, and they know, like a great expert in Facebook or in Google, they know how to target very specific categories in every population.
So however primitive the actual methods may be, the beheadings and so on that we see, they're as advanced as Google, it sounds like, at least in human resources. So before we continue about this conversation, Nat, I know you have a lot more to say about it. Eli Ochenberg has more on what seems to be a consistently growing phenomenon of Western residents joining terror militants.
From Paris through Copenhagen, all the way to Sydney and Minnesota, the sophisticated use of social media and charismatic radical ideas keeps attracting youth from the West to join terror groups, mostly the Islamic State organization. Most recently, the FBI arrested at least 6 people in what officials allege is an IS-inspired terror plot. Authorities in Minnesota and San Diego joined forces with the FBI in a year-long investigation and have been tracking youth who have traveled to Syria or tried to in order to fight alongside militants. The terror recruitment network focused on the Somali community in the Minneapolis area, where authorities noted that a handful of Minnesota residents, more than 22 young Somali men since 2007, have already traveled to Syria to fight with militants within the last year. At least one of them was killed. In Europe, the phenomenon is even bigger, and EU officials estimate that some 6,000 individuals have left for Syria. This is a rough approximation, as it is extremely difficult to keep track on foreign Muslim fighters in the Syrian theater. The UN paints an even more disturbing picture, saying there are more than 25,000 foreign fighters from over 100 countries who left their homes to join mainly Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group in Iraq and Syria, the largest number of foreign fighters in history. But the major challenges both in Europe and in the US are yet to come. What will happen when all of those young Western militants return home, driven to recruit more potential fighters, spread their extremist ideals, and maybe even carry out actual terror acts?
And before we continue on the people leaving the West to join IS, a look at some of the roots of IS. With us is Christoph Reuter, journalist for Der Spiegel, who authored the investigative report on the roots of the Islamic State. Mr. Reuter, thank you very much for being with us.
Good evening.
So we already know, and we discussed a lot about here in the studio, how the command of IS is very largely rooted actually in former Iraqi military brass, in Saddam Hussein's top military brass. But in this report, you sort of uncovered that it was a much more methodological planning. What did you uncover in this report?
Many people know or understood that you have former Iraqi intelligence officers, army officers in the leadership of IS, but what consequences this had, this we found out when we discovered in northern Syria a trove of papers, handwritten maps, plans, very detailed strategy how to subjugate Syria, how to conquer large parts of the country without a big force, but with brilliant planning, with infiltration, with secret kidnappings, with competing intelligence cells even on village level, to establish an order which is very resilient, very firm, and even to establish this order with a rather low number of actual fighters.
How far back do these documents go back, if we're to sort of guess when the actual planning, the building of the Islamic State began?
Well, the documents probably go back until 2012. We found draft versions for the intelligence apparatus, who should be in charge of what in the chain of command. Parts of these plans are basically copy-paste from what we know from Saddam Hussein's intelligence apparatus. But the interesting thing is parts of these plans were specifically designed for the anarchic situation you had in northern Syria in 2012-13, where there was no central power, but hundreds of local councils of rebel militias. So if you could infiltrate village by village by village without people knowing who you are first, you had a great chance of establishing your order before people would even notice who's behind it. And this was, I mean, the situation you had in Syria did not exist in Arab countries before. There you had normally a firm order, a dictatorship. So these Ba'athis not only were able to replicate the old system of Saddam Hussein, but to develop some new plans based basically on the knowledge and experience they had collected over 30 years in this business.
So not having the label of the Islamic State, which is now all over media around the world for some time, worked to their advantage in sort of building the empire, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you go through these papers, you find no Islamic references at all. It's a cold-blooded strategic plan for establishing power. It has nothing to do with Islam. Islam is used to attract the foreign fighters, which you just mentioned, from all over the world. And it is used to tell whoever wants to oppose their rule that, hey, you are an infidel because we are representing God.
That's
we
incredible.
are representing the Islamic State. So if you resist us, we have to kill you. We're very sorry. So it's an enormously powerful tool, but they just use this tool. They don't believe in it.
Christoph, I'm going to let Dr. Anata Ochberg-Marom, who's here in the studio, she'd like to ask you a question as well.
Good evening, Mr. Reuter. I would like to ask you regarding any hints backward to the history of the Islamic State. If you go backward to 2003 or 2004, what about any mastermind strategic plan that could be since then? I mean, a period of 10 years prior to this plan. Are there any hints?
Yes. To be honest, the greatest help and assistance to form the Islamic State and to win the most brilliant former Iraqi officers over to this were the first decrees of Paul Bremer to dissolve the former U.S. viceroy in Iraq in 2003, to dissolve the whole Iraqi army. So you had people who were not necessarily hardcore believers of Saddam, but suddenly they were jobless. They were jobless, they were angry, they went into resistance, and they were exactly those people which jihadi movements had not had before. Before, in Al-Qaeda, you had fanatics. You had people who would die for the belief, but would not know how to run a municipality, how to build a military structure to conquer some area. So suddenly you had these guys, and they were growing slowly through the ranks of what was first Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And in 2010, when US forces and Iraqi forces managed to capture or kill 80% of the leadership of the Islamic State, this was the golden hour for the former officers finally to take over the leadership.
Christoph, one last question. You mentioned a lot of developed planning about Syria, about what the Islamic State would do in Syria. As we know, the idea of the Islamic Caliphate extends far beyond just Syria. In the documents that you got a chance to see, is there a much greater, a wider plan for an Islamic State that spans across the Middle East?
No, it's not like this. The plans describe a kind of ready-made concept how you can subjugate and conquer each and every country, basically. You could apply them in Libya, or they are already applied. You could apply them in parts of Egypt. Maybe you could apply at a certain moment parts of these plans in Saudi Arabia. But it was not about first we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. It was about how do we get control over area A, B, C, D, E, and this can be extended until Indonesia.
Christoph Reuter, incredibly interesting. Of all the things we hear about the Islamic State, some of these things we have not heard. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yes, Nurit,
incredible.
Just a translation on the ground of what Mr. Reuter said is the fact that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State, was a former officer in the Iraqi army and a former civil servant in the Iraqi army. This theory would be perfect if the Islamic State would have a different behavior in Syria, for example, because what we learned from Christoph is that the Islamic State was built on the ruins of the Ba'ath Party and the former Iraqi army in Iraq, which was a secular socialist Arab party, but it was the same party who ruled in Damascus and in Baghdad, in Iraq and in Syria. They were
for 40 years, yeah.
Yeah, and they were very rival. The truth is that Saddam Hussein and Assad, the father, were not big lovers, but this does not justify the atrocities that the Islamic State are also carrying in Syria, because if this theory was right, they should have a different behavior, or it might have a different behavior because people accuse the Syrian regime on encouraging and maybe creating even the Islamic.
But in terms of the planning,
differentiate between, this is what's important here. They don't go any and each country by itself. You know, they have and that's why I asked him a master plan. But let's go backward to the history. Let's go back to the Zarqawi era, which is 10 years prior to Baghdadi. It is very important to go then and then to see the comparison between
two things that I think are important to take out of that is one, the United States' responsibility, as many claim, that sort of the decision to oust all of the ex-Saddam Hussein leaders left them in the cold, and really what else are they going to do? They're not going to work at a coffee shop, obviously. And second, that this was very methodological, that they went realistically, not just saying we're going to take over the world, but from point A to B to C.
An Iraqi officer, after one struggle in Tikrit, he said, we are looking for the Islamic State fighters. There were no bodies of the Islamic State fighters. We have no prisoners of Islamic State fighters, and this showed that they are very deeply established within the local societies and the local tribes in the region, in the Sunni triangle of Iraq, which means that the Islamic State might be in some places only a name, that a title that want to, and it is on the ground. It is presented by former soldiers or members of the Ba'ath and old Iraqi army.
So I want to shift.
I put it very, very strictly. They are embedded in the population in each and every country. That is a problem, because most of the Arabs and the Muslims are afraid of,
and they
not only the Western.
doing it before we knew about them. I want to shift now a little bit to Lebanon, which is also an important story going on today with Saudi-backed arms, a big $3 billion Saudi program beginning in Lebanon. Before we discuss, let's see a little more. Correspondent Shai Ben-Ari has the details on the major arms deal in Lebanon and the implications.
On Monday, the first shipment of a massive arms deal valued at no less than $3 billion arrived in Beirut, Lebanon. The weapons are French, but the deal has been subsidized by Saudi Arabia. This first shipment contains 48 Milan anti-tank missiles, but the arms deal will eventually include armored vehicles, heavy artillery, and mortars, among other weaponry. Some 20 French companies are involved in the deal, signed in Riyadh last November.
The first delivery for which we're gathered today is the beginning of a cycle that brings Lebanon and our bilateral defense relations into new dimension, for which we have good reason to congratulate ourselves.
Both the Saudis and the French are looking to strengthen the moderate elements within Lebanese society, which now find themselves threatened from a number of directions. To the east, jihadist forces involved in the Syrian civil war, namely the Islamic State terrorist group, as well as the al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front, have clashed numerous times with the Lebanese army along the Syria-Lebanon border in recent months.
Lebanon
is indeed under unprecedented pressure from IS and al-Nusra Front, making the control of its borders vital to security. Lebanon, this country that knows the price of war, does not want to be dragged into the chaos that surrounds it. France is and will be here to help.
But the threats are not only external. The enemy within, in this case, makes for a truly complex scenario. The Saudis and the French are no friends of Hezbollah, the radical armed Shiite organization that is now a major political force in Lebanon. While much of the army is still dominated by Christians and Sunnis, the situation today is not as it was in the past, as cases of cooperation between Hezbollah militants and the Lebanese military have been noted. The fear of these arms finding their way into Hezbollah hands has some in the region very anxious.
So, Ali, we've been speaking a lot on the news today about Yemen, about how this is sort of the ultimate proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia that's playing out there, and that it's all about the actually greater interests that are playing, the greater weapons that are playing. We already know Iran has a substantial presence in Lebanon, namely with Hezbollah. Now you have substantial Saudi weapons going through France. What are the implications?
First, also
How big
the
of a deal is
Saudis
it?
had a very substantial presence in Lebanon for many years. The Saudis were there supporting the Sunnite society. Saad al-Hariri, father Rafiq al-Hariri, who was assassinated, was a Saudi-educated and Saudi civil servant who was planted in Lebanon, but they lost the war. They lost this battle in Lebanon for the Shiite Hezbollah. Shai ended his report in the fact that there is a fear that these weapons will find a way to Hezbollah, and I think here the Saudis are doing a very risky bet on trying to bring, and the French, of course, but the French are enjoying the fact that they are receiving money. It is boosting the influence of France, but the big element of this agreement is not only the weapons, is the fact that during 4 years, between 2015 until the end of 2018, the French army will train Lebanese officers and soldiers in France and in Lebanon. Starting May, Lebanese soldiers and officers will join French military schools in France. And
who are they training them against? It's maybe a naive question, but
well, the
like
official
in Syria,
as we saw the French defense minister in this Beirut base saying that this aims to help the Lebanese army to fight Islamic State and Al-Nusra front, but there is no doubt that this aims to make a balance between the superpower of Hezbollah and the fact that Hezbollah is a militia, but that has the monopoly, the official monopoly of power almost in Lebanon, where we know that the monopoly of power should be given to the state and to the army.
Let's join to this conversation from Florida someone else who has a lot to say, always a Lebanese analyst, Tom Harb, also chairman of the American Mideast Coalition for Democracy. Tom, thanks very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
So maybe you heard a little bit of what Ali Waqid had to say here. For you, what does it mean when you see an influx of weapons, of boosted Saudi influence, and maybe even French for that matter? What does this mean for you, for Lebanon? It's going in a good direction to balance Iran, or just a bigger mess?
Well, anytime any arms goes to the Lebanese army is a good thing, because we want a strong Lebanese army to defend its boundaries and its people from any aggression. And the aggression been lately really is again the militias who control some streets in Lebanon, and like here in this case, Hezbollah. No, but the army has not been able to take Hezbollah for years, and we know in 2008 had occupied the streets of Beirut. And now every time they launch a war against Israel or somewhere else, we have no control. So therefore, any weapons to the Lebanese army, it's a good thing. However, in order for the Lebanese army to be in full control of the weapons, we need to liberate the defense ministry in Beirut from Hezbollah manipulation. Hezbollah controls, has big control in the defense ministry.
Tom, is that a realistic goal?
It has to be. Otherwise, like if we use the Egyptian example, after the Muslim Brotherhood had controlled everything in Egypt, there was a rebellion from within, and look what the Sisi, how changed the atmosphere inside Egypt and in the Middle East. And the same thing has to happen in Lebanon, between the leadership in the Lebanese army and the political leadership. They need to unite and really free the defense ministry of the control of Hezbollah.
Tom, in the Middle East, as we know, everything is connected. There is also the Iran nuclear deal, already a warming of sort of economic relations with several different countries with Iran. Big concern for those who do not like Iran for more weapons inside Lebanon. So how much is Saudi Arabia's actions, although it was perhaps a long-planned deal, sort of fueled in Lebanon by Iran maybe getting a boost from this deal?
Well, the problem with Iran for the last 30 years, they used Hezbollah to attack Israel and rallied the Muslim Sunnis and Shia throughout the Arab world from Indonesia to Morocco. And that was the biggest mistake. Without the Sunnis population in the Middle East realizing it's a stronger movement for the Iranians to expand to the Middle East. All of a sudden, in the last 4 or 5 years, the Arab nations realized the agenda of the mullahs of Iran. And now they're trying to react to it. And it might be a little bit too late, but they have to react somewhere. But regarding the Lebanese army and the weapons to the Lebanese army before the coalition for Yemen, so it has nothing to do, and I think I would leave them two separate tracks.
All right, Tom Harb, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for being with us.
You're welcome.
In our little time we have left, go ahead.
If we take the Israeli angle, the final goal of this plan is that when Hezbollah decide to declare war on Israel, there will be a Lebanese army that will be capable to stop Hezbollah, and this is good for Israel. And if Hezbollah will decide to go further, deeper in Syria, there will be Lebanese troops that they will guard the borders between Syria and Lebanon, because the implication of Hezbollah in the Syrian conflict had brought Al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State into Lebanon. The question is, in this case, Iran will not give up, I think.
That's why I say it's to prevent a deterioration, to have like a Western front for the stability, for the sake of Lebanon is very important for Israel. We would take also the Nusra Front here. It's a kind of a big say, listen, we are in this playground, we are not going away, but it's it's a more, that's what you mentioned before, it's a lot more a complicated war between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Coalitions is something we've been talking about here all the time. We spoke about it yesterday. We will continue to speak about which coalitions are out there, how effective are they, how do their interests actually conflict, which we see many times do. You'll be back to explain it to us. Ali Waqed, Dr. Anat Okhberg-Marom, thank you very much for this. Very interesting. And we're going out for just 2 minutes, and we'll be back with the rest of the news today. Much more to say. Don't go anywhere. More arrests of young men trying to support or join the Islamic State from the U.S. to the U.K., while in Lebanon, the first batch of French-made weapons arrives with Saudi backing. Search and rescue efforts continue in the Mediterranean Sea after what's feared to be the worst migrant shipwreck in modern history. And in Luxembourg, EU foreign ministers hold a crisis meeting under pressure to find a solution. And Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in Pakistan with a $46 billion plan to link the two economies, setting the stage for a major boost in China's presence in Asia and the Middle East. Welcome back to the news today. The European Union is under pressure, a lot of pressure, to address the plight of African migrants who face an undetermined fate as they make their way to Europe by sea. But the urgent need for humanitarian aid is often trumped by a growing policy against immigration. Ayman Siksak has more on today's meeting of foreign ministers in Luxembourg.
European Union foreign ministers are attempting to come up with a plan of action in the wake of the latest migrant tragedy, which left hundreds of Africans feared drowned in the Mediterranean as they made their way to Italy. The ministers gathered Monday in Luxembourg as pressure mounts to find a suitable solution.
Let me say that the main issue here is to build together a common sense of European responsibility on what is happening in the Mediterranean, knowing that there is no easy solution, there is no magic solution.
Despite Monday's parley, many EU governments still refuse to fund rescue operations in the Mediterranean for fear of encouraging more people to make the crossing into Europe. Foreign ministers at the Luxembourg Assembly blamed the problem on human trafficking.
we have to understand that 70% of irregular migrants towards Europe are arriving in Italy. It can't be only an Italian problem.
British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond also said the EU must tackle the core issues in the immigrants' countries of origin.
It requires a comprehensive European-level response to be effective, and that response has got to include targeting the criminals who are managing this traffic in human suffering.
Meanwhile, back in Italy, the port of Catania is due to welcome 28 survivors of the migrant shipwreck, in which some 700 people are feared to have died, as the International Organization for Migration calls for an urgent increase in life-saving efforts at sea.
Yes, and with me from Geneva is UNHCR spokesman Adrian Edwards. Mr. Edwards, thanks very much for being with us. Good evening.
Good evening.
So before getting into the responsibility and the blame, what's a bit of the latest on this rescue going on now still in the Mediterranean seas?
This has been a very dramatic weekend, as you may know. On the early hours of, on the late on Saturday night, we heard the first reports of this boat having overturned. There's been a long rescue operation. People have just been brought ashore today in Malta and also in Catania in Sicily. We are at the moment looking at these numbers now look like they're confirmed. About 700 people have drowned. Only about 28 or so have been brought alive from this. So it is a tragedy of really different proportions to anything we've seen before.
On the same day, Adrian, we heard reports of there were some distress signals also from similar areas of the sea. Any update on that, if that was in fact another disaster in the making or standard?
There are other incidents being reported today, several others, in fact, and rescue operations underway there too. And this is symptom really of this escalating problem of more and more people crossing the Mediterranean. And if I might just go back to one of the comments from earlier in the introduction, this is no longer just a migrant flow. It has become a refugee flow too. Globally, we're seeing record high levels of forced displacement from conflict, from wars. We're also seeing an increase in numbers of people coming across the Mediterranean, many of them from major refugee-producing countries, including Syria, Somalia, Eritrea, and others. And we're seeing more people losing their lives in the process. So that fundamentally is why we have been seeking to address this from the point of view of saving lives. If we cannot resolve the original source of these problems, the conflicts, then the focus has to be on saving lives, better rescue at sea, better efforts to dissuade or disincentivize these journeys to the extent that's possible within an asylum situation.
So speaking exactly of that, of the original problems and just how complex it is, how do you sort of reconcile, on one hand, refugees, thousands of refugees who do need to leave their own country, and the EU, who is having trouble absorbing them and taking responsibility for it?
There are two issues here. One is the migration story, how Europe deals with an increase in migration via the Mediterranean. The other story is how does Europe deal with the challenge of increasing numbers of people fleeing wars, fleeing for their lives, needing safe haven and refuge. And that's the asylum challenge. And that has to be looked at in addition to the rescue capacity on the Mediterranean. There also has to be a proper disembarkation process, a whole load of other measures,
right,
all along this journey to address the challenge.
Hopefully at this next EU meeting that's being called for next week, some of those things will actually be on the table. Adrian Edwards, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Moving to the UK, Britain is set to vote in this year's general elections just over 2 weeks from today. As the election campaigns heat up, parties fight for media attention. Most recently, the leader of the Scottish National Party threatened to, quote, paralyze the army if Labour's David Miliband wins the polls. Ori Shapira takes a look at the latest in UK elections.
2.5 weeks before British voters head to the polls, and it's still hard to predict who will lead the UK in the next 5 years. According to the latest polls, no party is likely to win a majority.
Right now, we are looking at two main options. It will be Labour and the SNP, Labour in the minority government with the SNP, or the Tories again with Nick Clegg and the Liberal Democrats.
All eyes are now on the smaller parties, who may play a crucial role more than ever before The Scottish National Party said it's prepared to paralyse Britain's armed forces and shut down government departments unless Labour's Ed Miliband commits to scrapping Trident if elected. However, 7 months after the Scottish referendum on independence ended with a resounding no vote, the leader of the SNP says another referendum is not planned.
If you vote SNP on May the 7th, you are not voting to give the SNP a mandate for a second referendum.
Meanwhile, another possible kingmaker, the UKIP party, launched its own campaign urging a succession from the European Union.
But we desperately seek a referendum so that we can set this country free from political union.
And what about the big parties? British opposition leader Ed Miliband promised to prosecute employers who exploit migrant workers. And David Cameron? After a promising campaign launch, it seems that the British Prime Minister is keeping a low profile. Is this a wise tactic? Answers on May 7.
Thank you. And with me to make some sense of what we can expect in a few weeks is I-24 News London contributor Jonathan Sacerdoti. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks very much for being with us. So, as in any election, lay it out for me, the main issues in this election at this point, just a few weeks before.
So the main issues that you heard some of them discussed there in that report are to do with austerity, to do with the quality of living, to do with employment, to do with the National Health Service. And as there are 17 days left until the general election, we have, of course, gone poll crazy. The latest ICM poll for The Guardian newspaper showed David Cameron's Conservative Party ahead at 34%, but even that is a 5-point drop from their position a week ago. ICM's latest poll, though, has Labour down 1 point on 32, with UKIP up 4 on 11%, and the Liberal Democrats up 2 on 10%. But of course, if one poll says one thing, the other has to say the other. And a poll carried out by Populist shows the exact reverse, with Labour unchanged at 34%. So it really is neck and neck if we go by these different polls.
As we've learned here, polls really, until the very last minute, can be very misleading. What about the SNP? They released their sort of manifesto today. What role do they have in these elections?
The Scottish National Party could emerge as Britain's third largest party in these elections, which is actually extraordinary. In 2010, the party won just 6 seats, and they've never had more than 11 seats. Yet polls suggest that they may win 50 or more in this election, following their popularity after their failed bid for Scottish independence in last year's referendum. And you heard there Nicola Sturgeon saying that she would set the direction of a minority Labour government if they relied on her. She pledged today, as she launched her party's manifesto, that if voters chose her party, she will stand up for Scotland's interests and fight its corner, as well on a national level, making her #1 priority, she said, to end austerity, opposing those spending cuts proposed by both Labour and Conservatives.
In the very little time we have left, as in any election, as in any good campaign, there were some strange moments. I understand.
Indeed, there have been some funny moments. We had a Conservative candidate standing for re-election who dismissed as nonsense the idea that he tried to influence voters by offering them biscuits and muffins. And he's not the first. A UKIP candidate was let off for giving people sausage rolls. So there's plenty of crazy stories going on as well here.
Jonathan Sacerdoti, if that's all it took, if only that's all it took to win an election was some biscuits and muffins. Thank you very much for this, and you'll keep being with us in the next weeks as we get closer to the election. And now to economy. And with me from the I-24 News Economy magazine is Daniel Roth. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, $46 billion have made their way into Pakistan. What country has that kind of money other than
China? China has it, and China's using it. This is a really great deal for China. Pakistan hopes it's a great deal for Pakistan. The idea here is for China to buy a route into the Arabian Sea and have a more direct way to send goods to that direction.
Sort of transform it into a regional economic hub.
Right. I mean, this is Pakistan's intention is to become a stable economic hub. Right now, they deal with insurgencies. They have massive power outages. This deal is going to help build infrastructure. It's going to help build electricity, energy infrastructure. It's going to, Pakistan hopes, bring it into the 21st century in a way that makes it an economic hub.
If we can really compare, who is it a better deal for Pakistan or for China? Because both obviously stand a lot to gain from this.
Well, I think the other way of looking at it is that China doesn't really have much to lose. They are the leading emerging economy in the world, even with this minor slowing of growth. Pakistan has a lot to win in this, and so I think Pakistan is excited about this kind of deal. They're about to sign in various deals $28 billion right off the bat, which is a big deal for them. At the end of the day, it's a huge deal for Pakistan. Could be nice for China.
Over how long is this sort of spread? It's starting now in undefinite.
Well, this is I think what they would say is this is hopefully the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Like I said, $28 billion is right out of the gate with
just pocket change, just a quick check for $28 billion.
Yeah, just send it on over.
All right. Well, I'm guessing this is also a big move for China in terms of boosting its influence in the region. So,
absolutely,
interesting. A lot of money.
Huge,
Daniel
huge.
Roth, thank you very much for this. Moving to the U.S. this morning in Boston, 30,000 people set off for the world's oldest annual marathon. This time around, it still has meaning for the city far beyond just the run itself. After the 2013 Boston bombing that left 3 people dead and wounded another 260. Tomorrow, the convicted bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev returns to court for the next phase of the trial, the debate over the death sentence. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu may have won a sweeping victory in elections in mid-March, but his success in forming a government seems to be hitting roadblocks. Netanyahu was granted a 2-week extension this morning to continue coalition talks. For now, he looks close to inking deals with 2 ultra-Orthodox parties and the centrist, relatively new Kulanu party. And with me to make some sense of this, which is maybe even more complicated than UK elections we just heard about, is Dov Lipan, former member of Israeli parliament of the Yesh Atid party. Good evening.
Good evening. Good to be here.
So let's just start with what is going on behind the scenes in the coalition, because there were periods of sort of silence versus other years. There were lots of rumors about a unity government with the Zionist Union. Where do we stand?
It's far more complicated than people realize. In the beginning, people thought, sure, right-wing, ultra-Orthodox government, and that'll be all. The difficulties are twofold. Number one, apparently Netanyahu has promised the Shas party, an ultra-Orthodox party, to have control over the religion ministry. The problem is that's pushing aside the entire religious Zionist community, and therefore Naftali Bennett from the Jewish Home Party will not be able to stand for that to happen. He needs some part in that ministry. But there are also issues on the table. You mentioned he's close to signing with the ultra-Orthodox parties. They're demanding all kinds of changes when it comes to religion and state. I was part of the past Knesset. Right. Our party made a lot of changes to try to moderate things. They're demanding to make it more extreme again. The question is, can Avigdor Lieberman, for example, in the Yisrael Beitenu party, or Naftali Bennett allow that to happen? So there are major, major issues behind the scenes.
For the future of the country in a very significant
way.
Yes,
we're talking about major, major issues. You know, people en masse in the last few days of the elections ran towards Netanyahu because of the security issue and some of the fear.
The classic defense fear.
Yes, but then in the process, they forgot about all these internal issues that define us as a country, and now Netanyahu is trying to dance between all these different demands. It's going to be a fascinating 2 weeks. I don't know how it's going to play out in the end, and you mentioned the other trump card, which is there a possibility of him turning to Yitzhak Herzog and possibly creating a unity government?
Does it look for you?
Very unlikely from where we're sitting and from what I hear within the Knesset. But on the other hand, the question is, how strong will Naftali Bennett and Avigdor Lieberman be in terms of their demands on the Prime Minister? If they were asking me for advice, I would tell them to stay strong, go to the opposition if necessary. People like to see some level of ideology.
Kind of opposition.
Opposition, ideology, I stand for something, and I'm not going to give everything just to join a government.
On the ultra-Orthodox side, how far, if he does go in that direction, if Netanyahu does go in that direction, what kind of changes, how severe will the changes be? Because for our viewers, the control of the rabbinate over things like marriage and divorce are very, very big deal in the country.
Absolutely. I mean, the last government, like I said, made a lot of progress in these areas to open things up more to the broader public. They're going to try to bring it all back under ultra-Orthodox control, a more stringent, a more distancing approach to religion and Judaism in Israel, which is going to have a major impact. Also, the draft law regarding the ultra-Orthodox funding.
For ultra-Orthodox to serve in the army.
To serve in the army, I'm sorry, which we made a passed a law. They want to make changes to that legislation. They want to get money back to the rabbinic seminaries instead of towards leading them towards employment. So we're talking about major societal issues, which unfortunately, from where I sit, the Prime Minister will give them whatever they want to form a coalition. Hopefully these other parties that are involved in the negotiations will stand strong and won't simply give away everything.
And those things are not too easy to reverse, those decisions, once they're made, as we see.
That is true. Hopefully the decisions we made the last government will be strong enough will not be undone.
When you're in government and then you see somebody
very hard
else
to see that happening. Hopefully that won't happen.
Policies. Dov Liebman, thank you very much for being with me, and we'll see you here often explaining what is going on there behind the scenes and where it's all going.
Looking
Thanks very
forward to
much
it.
for this.
Thank you.
Now to something completely different. One of the most controversial Christian relics is on display for the first time in 5 years. The Shroud of Turin is believed by many to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Michal Divon has more.
More than 1 million Christians from around the globe are expected to head for Turin in the coming weeks to catch a glimpse of one of Christianity's most celebrated relics.
I took a flight from Costa Rica to be in Turin to this big event because I knew that this is the only time that they are going to have the real manto sagrado here.
The 14-foot sheet, also known as the Holy or Turin Shroud, is said to be the cloth in which the crucified body of Christ was buried. It is on display for the first time in 5 years.
It's something that's venerated worldwide by those who believe in Jesus. It's something you don't see often. It is very rarely exhibited to the public.
Devotees believe the image imprinted on the shroud is that of Jesus. However, skeptics are just as adamant that it is nothing more than a medieval forgery, which scientists have dated to around 1300 years after Christ's crucifixion. The shroud will be exhibited for 12 hours a day in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. When last presented in 2010, more than 2 million people viewed it.
And now to sports. And with me, as every evening, is host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev. Good evening.
Evening, Nurit.
What do you have today? Lots of fast motorcycle, fast cars.
Yeah, a lot of motorsports. We begin with the MotoGP. Huge race last night in Argentina, and this rivalry between the old guard and the new guard. Valentino Rossi and Rafa Marquez. There we see him. Valentino Rossi, the Italian number 46. He's 36 years old. Look what happens now.
Whoa.
Marc Marquez is chasing him. Boom. He's down. Valentino Rossi wins.
He hurt?
No, not really, but he lost.
This is a normal thing.
Yeah, it is normal. The thing is, Marc Marquez is a two-time defending world champion. The new guy, 23 years old. Then comes Valentino Rossi, shows him, hey.
There's always a new guy.
Yeah, but the old guards apparently know a trick or two.
That angle, it's unreal that they're able to manage the whole race.
Their knees
like that.
really touch the floor at about 300 kilometers per hour. I don't want to think how that feels.
So the fact that he came out with just a scratch is probably
a big. I'm sure he's very disappointed. That's what hurts him. How come I lost? If I fall, okay. As long as I win, I don't care.
So Formula One, I know more about. I see more. This is crazy. This is crazy to me. Formula One, almost as crazy, but
just as crazy, I'd say. But yeah, things are going. If in the world of MotoGP, we may have a big rivalry coming up. In the Formula One, it seems we're going the same way we went last year. Lewis Hamilton may have lost the second race of the season, but this is the night race in Bahrain, the fourth of the season. And again, Lewis Hamilton and Team Mercedes win. So it's 3 out of 4 for Hamilton. Sebastian Vettel won the second race of the season. We thought something may be developing there. But as of now, again, Mercedes are first. Lewis Hamilton is first. Doesn't seem as if it's going to change the end.
And these are the few months. These are the months for Formula One.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so fun to watch. There's a race last weekend, the race now. If you like this, you're glued to the screen right now.
And the Monaco Grand Prix is what, end of May?
Yeah. It's coming up soon as
You'll
well.
be back to tell us about that.
Absolutely.
Until then, you have something strange, as almost every night.
Yes, that's what I'm here for. That's
not
what
linked to
you're
anything.
really.
Please.
The drag queen race in the Florida Keys. It's as funny.
One of the last things I thought I'd ever hear you say.
It's as funny as it sounds. Here you can see. Now, apparently, it's there to celebrate the Florida Keys independence, because in 1982 they broke out from the United States. I did not know that.
Really?
But it's called the Crunch Republic Independence Celebration because in 1982 apparently there was some kind of ceremonial secession from the United States. So they celebrated they celebrated by drag queens running up and down the streets, falling on wheels and whatever there is.
They make looking in heels pretty easy. Running in heels.
Yeah. I don't want to think what happens if I would try to do it. I would do far, far worse than they do, by far.
I might pay to see that one day. That could be interesting.
I wouldn't mind. Yeah. Okay. So let's organize it.
See a different
tomorrow
side
in
of
the
Jonathan
studio,
Rega.
running in high heels.
Well, we might hold you to that, Jonathan Rega.
Please
For
don't.
now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to something with a different tone here in Israel. This Wednesday is Israel's Memorial Day, which is marked not only by Israeli Jews, but also by the Druze community and others in the country. Over 400 Druze have fallen in the course of their service in the various branches of the Israel Defense Forces. Shai Ben-Ari was in the village of Chofesh yesterday to speak with the bereaved relatives of Druze soldiers.
Chofesh is a Druze village in Israel's northern Galilee district. The surroundings are peaceful and scenic, but the mood here is somber these days as Wednesday, Israeli Memorial Day, approaches. One of the factors that makes the Druze minority unique among Israel's non-Jewish citizens is the willingness of its members to enlist in the IDF.
We are here at the military cemetery in Chofesh. 31 people are buried here. Their graves serve as solemn reminders of the price paid by the residents of this village, as well as the Druze community as a whole, for their loyalty to the state of Israel.
Faris Muhammad is Master Sergeant of the Sword Battalion, an IDF combat force originally known as the Minorities Unit. Many Jewish soldiers still serve in the unit to this day, which is often found on the front lines.
Every Memorial Day reawakens it all and reminds us of the difficult moments that we experienced together on the days when the soldiers fell in combat. There is one fallen soldier who is constantly in my thoughts, Sameh Hussein, who is buried here and was killed in combat in Gaza on the 23rd of November 2000. Samer's older brother, Nizar, is my best friend. On the day Samer enlisted, he chose to volunteer for a challenging combat service in the Sword Battalion. Nizar told me to watch over him. Samer came to us, but to my dismay, I wasn't able to keep him safe. I brought him back in a coffin, something we didn't want to happen, and that is still with me today.
Chofesh was also home to one of the true heroes of the Israeli Jewish community, Colonel Nabi Meri, who was killed in combat in the Gaza Strip in 1996, on his first day as deputy commander of the Gaza Division. This commemorative chamber is dedicated to Nabi, who many Israeli Jews today are named after.
When he enlisted, he asked to join the paratroop brigade. Until then, the Druze would only serve in the minority unit. And he in fact broke the barrier, and today it's completely different. Druze serve in all units of the IDF. Many people from Israel and abroad, school students, prospective army recruits, come here, and cadets from the IDF's officer course often come to write papers on the image of the officer, taking Nabi as an example.
Considering the significant contribution of the Druze community to the security of the State of Israel, some are surprised that true equality continues to evade them.
Druze communities do not enjoy the same status as Jewish ones. We encounter many obstacles in the way of municipal planning and construction. We are Israelis just like all other Israelis. There is no reason an Israeli living in Tel Aviv should enjoy all of the rights and privileges, while a Jew who is proud to be Israeli receives less.
Regardless of political realities, memorial services will be duly marked on Wednesday.
And now to culture. And who else with me is culture correspondent Shachar Peled to talk to us about what else but Star Wars.
Absolutely, Nurit. So much fun. Are you a Star Wars fan,
I am,
by the way?
actually.
Well, who isn't?
You might not think so, but I am.
Who isn't? And it's been a wild week for the die-hard Star Wars fans, starting with the release of the new trailer, finally, much anticipated trailer for The Force Awakens. This brought many viewers to tears, actually. It was so exciting.
It's such a wave of reaction when you see something Star Wars. It's so emotional for people.
It's
amazing.
true, and people took this far away. First of all, seeing, Han Solo, Harrison Ford here, saying, Chewie, we're home. This was such an awesome trailer that it's already given Disney's stock a $2 billion boost.
Wow.
$2 billion rise, indicating the excitement among the investors, also known as nerds. toward this
I think some
upcoming
others
movie.
might take offense to that, including myself.
Well, it's a compliment. I'll take it as a compliment. And if this teaser wasn't enough, then the Japan carrier All Nippon Airways (ANA) has launched a 5-year Star Wars project that includes a new Boeing 787 Dreamliner painted as the droid R2-D2.
And we're going to have a lot of nerds in line to ride.
Yes, and I'll try.
ticket.
Yeah, I'll try going on that airplane myself. And since this is a 5-year plan, then I don't know what else is expected now that they dressed up a plane as a droid. But if you've ever dreamed of having an R2-D2 for yourself, some Star Wars fans have made that dream come true. The Star Wars convention called Star Wars Celebration took place this week in California, and it was especially exciting, naturally, this year. Let's hear what some of the more geeky visitors had to say.
You know, for me, when I first started building my droid, there were 2 reasons. One was sort of a love of Star Wars, love of the universe, and really wanted to have my own piece within it. And R2 is such an iconic character that, you know, I instantly was driven by it.
I built them because I like droids, I like Star Wars, and I'm a member of the R2 builders.
It took 9 months, pretty much full-time, all my spare time. Weekends, I even took a couple weeks of vacation.
Speaks for itself.
Yes.
The excitement.
Absolutely. And, well, the film will be released December 18th, ahead of Christmas. It's bound to be a big, big box office hit.
I'm surprised they just released it now. Normally it's like 3 years before that the
Well, they waited, and J.J. Abrams, the director, sees it as a Western and a fairy tale, so there's still much to work and edit, and we just can't wait.
A lot of excitement. I wonder what those box office numbers will be. Shahal Pettit, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
As always, and we're going out for a 2-minute break, and we'll be back with much more of the news today with the Daily Debate and One-on-One. Don't go anywhere.